tossers have thrown it out the door with their behaviour this week. They should be ashamed of themselves. They should absolutely look at themselves in the mirror and wonder what the have they been doing. They were hissing at us and calling us cheats in the Lord's long room, and they have the gall to say, talk to us about the spirit of cricket. Absolute bullshit. There's a big appeal that's hit him on the pad. He's out. Lions gone. New South Wales are 9 down. Onto Sydney Road, and it's hit a car. Oh, I think it's hit a car. What a way to bring up your 50.
All you want is to leave it all behind. Now there is a simple remedy to stay fit for all eternity.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menas, and I am trying to digest the news that the great Steve Smith has retired from one-day cricket. It's come as a total shock to me this afternoon. I did not see this coming. I should have maybe, because, you know, when you look at the big picture, maybe it is time for him to take a break from one of the formats. But huge news to come out. And joining me to go through it all is sports broadcaster Damien Watson. Damien, did you see this coming?
Not necessarily, but I'm not surprised overall either about the decision. I mean, he's in his mid-30s now, Steve Smith. He's going to have to try and manage his workload over time, and the demands are just greater and greater these days, particularly if you want to partake in domestic T20 competitions around the world as well. Something sometimes has to give, and one-day cricket, I think most people would agree, out of the three formats is the lesser in terms of attention. So, you know, as you get older, I don't necessarily say you withdraw or anything like that, but other priorities sort of come to the fore, don't they, in life?
Yeah, it did surprise me a little bit because, you know, Smith said he would love to try and play in the 2028 Olympics, which is a T20 competition. So I thought, well, if Smith's going to keep playing until then, surely he'll probably try and play in the 2027 50 over World Cup. I thought maybe he'd still be keen on making that tournament, but he's obviously decided no, he's going to focus on Test cricket and T20 cricket now. He's not going to try and win another 50 over World Cup. And, you know, he retires after the Champions Trophy semi-final defeat. But, you know, looking at Steve Smith's 50 over career, it is quite extraordinary. He played 171 day internationals, made 5,800 runs, made 1,235 50s. His average was 43.28, which is, for example, better than Ricky Ponting's average. And I think, you know, a big part of his legacy is winning 2 World Cups. He was an integral part of the 2015 World Cup when he was a youngster. He made a lot of runs throughout that tournament, including a magical 100 in the semi-final against India. And then, you know, was a part of the 2023 World Cup team that won. So, you know, he goes out a champion. He also captained Australia in 64 matches and finished as captain in the Champions Trophy. And really, you know, he leaves a great legacy in 50 over cricket. I think it's, you know, one of his best formats.
Yeah, absolutely. And you look back, probably the best ever knock he had at one day level or in that format, Menas, was in late 2016 when he scored that 164 off 157 against New Zealand in Sydney, 14 fours, 4 massive sixes as well. He was a player that, you know, never necessarily deterred or deferred from playing his natural game. And yeah, you just have a look at some of the innings over the years. And you mentioned that 2015 one-day World Cup. How integral was he during that particular tournament? You go back in particular to the semi-final as well with that crucial 100 off just 89 deliveries, Menas, against India. And you just wonder
I was there for
how
that.
much of an impact that had on the tournament as well. So, you know, he stood up in the big moments, and you're quite right, certainly something to be proud of. And even in that losing semi-final in the 2019 World Cup, Menas, he really did play that lone hand against England when he scored that 85 with Ed Sheeran in attendance. That's one thing I'll remember about that match. But yeah, a couple of memorable innings.
Yeah, he also took 28 one-day international wickets when he was bowling a lot more in his younger days. But, you know, cricket.com.au put out some comparisons between some of the other great players. And So you compare him to, say, Adam Gilchrist. He averaged 36 in one-day cricket with a strike rate of 97. Smith averaged 43 with a strike rate of 87. Matt Hayden averaged just above Smith with 44 and a strike rate of 79. Aaron Finch averaged 39 with the bat and a strike rate almost exactly the same. Mark Waugh averaged 39 at a strike rate of 76, obviously different eras. So Steve Smith's stats stack up to anybody's. I guess, David Warner, he averaged 45 at a strike rate of 97. So they're extraordinary stats from Warner. But Ponting averaged 42, strike rate of 80. So, your Smith was such a valuable member of this 50 over side. I think it really suited his game because he could manipulate the strike in the middle overs. He could find the boundary when needed. It's not quite as frenetic as T20 cricket. So, it was the perfect format for him. And I remember when he played. He scored 200s at the SCG in 3 days against India in 50 over cricket. I think this was around COVID times, and he made those 200s in no time. And he was just a exquisite player. And I think it is a big loss for this 50 over side. And now we're seeing significant change in the team. And Smith's pulled stumps up. He was men's ODI Player of the Year twice in 2015 and 2021, and he was a member of the ICC Men's ODI Team of the Year in 2015. So, a huge legacy and stunning news to come out of that Champions Trophy campaign. I thought Smith might go on for a bit longer, but now his focus will be on Test cricket and T20 cricket.
Yeah, that's right. And again, that's where I sort of look at it and thinking, well, it was a surprise to hear it now. But when you think about the practicalities of it, Menners, and his age and the fact that he wants to try and conserve as much energy as possible to keep going, that was the lesser of the priorities. But a great career, no question about that, in the one-day format. And I'm sure that one-day team will miss his leadership as well, just that composure out there on the park too. He really did lift his teammates in that sense as well.
Yeah, and just from a personal point of view, it hit me quite hard because this is really the beginning of the end for Smith. This is the first format to go, and obviously there's only going to be more, and it's how soon it happens, whether it's at the end of I can see a comment in the YouTube chat, maybe it's at the end of this Ashes, as soon as this, that Smith pulls up stumps in Test cricket. So we're really coming to the end of this just great Australian batter that I've loved watching and covering so much. So, yeah, sad news, I've got to say.
Yeah, absolutely. I still think, as good as his one-day career has been, I don't know, I've gained the most enjoyment out of him watching him play in the Test arena. That's just me. Just with his composure, his stroke play. He never really deviated from his natural game and was just at his peak. So very, very good to watch. He's probably not as consistent as he once was in that format, but he does prove a lot of people wrong. So I still think there's a bit to come, certainly at the T20 level. Betters, he'll be playing domestic T20 games, I reckon, for a long, long time to come while he's still hitting them around, smashing them around.
Yeah, I guess one of the reasons I read out those stats about trying to compare Smith to other great Australian 50 over batters is because I do think the greatness of his Test career overshadows his one-day cricket. The fact that he, really is, up there with the best since Bradman that Australia's produced with the bat, that his 50 over cricket is often sort of been overshadowed. Whereas, when you look at it under the microscope, his 50 over cricket is as good as anybody's. And, he's also played in an era where Australia's played a lot less 50 over cricket. So, he's only played those 170 games in another era that's 250, 300 games. Yeah. And those stats are really padded. So, in the opportunities he's had, he's just been an enormous contributor, and 2 World Cups is probably what signifies that this guy's a winner. All right, so Steve Smith gone from the 50 over side. The regeneration is on. Now we have to talk about the Champions Trophy. We're recording this on Wednesday night Australian time, so South Africa and New Zealand are playing in the second semi-final, but Australia have been bundled out of the Champions Trophy. They lost to India overnight, and it was an odd feeling because everyone was going for Australia because I think there's a feeling in the cricket world that this tournament's too heavily weighted in India's favour. So for once, everyone was hoping Australia would win, and therefore the final would be in Pakistan. But that didn't happen. Australia won the toss and batted first. They made 264. They were all out in the 50th over. Steve Smith in his last game top scored with 73 off 96. Carey made 61 off 57. Head 39 off 33. Marnus 29 off 36. And Ben Dwarshuis down the order 19 off 29. Mohammad Shami took 3 for 48, bowled excellently. And we've just got a picture there of, had he been available for the Border Gavaskar series, how different it could have been. And the spinners for India, Chakravarti, Patel and Jadeja took 5 wickets between them. And then in reply, India chased it down 6 for 267 in 48.1 overs. No surprises. King Kohli, the master of the chase, did it. He made 84 off 98. Rohit Sharma 28 off 29 at the top. Shreyas Iyer 45 off 62. And KL Rahul 42 not out off 34. And Hardik Pandya 28 of 24 at the end there when things were getting a bit tight. For Australia, Ellis continued to impress in this tournament, 2 for 49 off his 10 overs. Ben Dwarshuis 1 for 39 off 7. Zampa 2 for 60. And Cooper Conley 1 for 37 off his 8 overs. So a stinging loss to Australia, Damien. Look, I think Australia got a lot wrong last night. So I've got a few areas where I think Australia just got this wrong. So firstly, I think they misread the pitch in Dubai, and then that led to a lot of decisions from there. I think they thought it was going to turn a lot more than it did, but actually the pitch turned a little, but it stayed quite consistent the whole way through. But that misreading of the pitch, I think, played into team selection, played into tactics, and meant that they didn't quite get it right.
Yeah, that's probably a fair call. And you look at the Cooper Connolly situation as well. I was working, I think, on radio at the time, and we were talking about it. And ultimately, we were like, I wonder, because Connolly obviously was named and, opening. And I think that raised a few eyebrows. It was a move that probably didn't quite come off for a young player to stand up in that situation. There was obviously a lot of pressure. But, I think you're right in regards to the misreading of the conditions. A couple of selection issues as well, as you mentioned. But I think also maybe a bit of fire in the belly for India helped as well. I think they wanted to atone. I mean, Champions Trophy, not as significant as the Border Gavaskar Trophy or the World Cup from a couple of years back. But I think there was that sense of wanting to atone as well and proving something against the Australians. I think that might have carried through a little bit as well. So, the Australians exit, but India have a lot to play for to try and prove themselves in a way to the cricketing world, because they've copped a lot of heat in more ways than one.
Yeah. So some of the things where I think Australia got it wrong. So I didn't like Spencer Johnson being left out of the team. And I said this when we spoke about him in the last podcast. He's a bit like a Mitchell Starc. And I think he can win you a game in his spell. Like he's the guy that if he's on, if he got the ball hooping around under lights, he could have just knocked over that Indian top order and Australia's into the final. So I didn't like Spencer Johnson being left out, a genuine match winner left out of a knockout game. And I didn't like the Cooper Connolly selection at all. I just don't think we needed him with the bat or with the ball. I think Zampa and Maxwell can bowl enough good overs of spin. You've also got Marnus who can bowl a few overs and bowl quite well against Afghanistan. So I wouldn't have picked Connolly at all, and certainly wouldn't have had him opening. I just think, the openers set the tone for a game. And sure, if you're going to pick Connolly, then you have to bat him down the order and make an Inglis or a Carey open. I understand why Australia did it. They didn't want to change the batting order that had been successful. And because they thought the pitch was going to turn, they wanted their good players to spin there in the middle overs, your Inglis, your Careys, etc. But I just think it was a myriad of bad decisions. So I didn't like the Connolly selection. I would have, and I said it, I would have picked Aaron Hardy because he does offer something with the ball. He can bowl a few overs. He could have opened the batting as well, but they could have gone with Jake Fraser McGurk if they wanted a specialist batter. So, those were things that I didn't work. And then again, I said in the preview that if it was a raging turner to pick Sanger, and it wasn't a raging turner. So the Tanvir Sanger selection ended up not working out so well because there wasn't a lot of assistance for him, and it just was quite easy to bat right throughout the day. So, I just think they got those things wrong with the selection, the way they set up. And look, I always praise Smith's captaincy and the brains trust, but clearly they just didn't get this pitch reading right. The story is this is a fresh pitch, so it had not been played on. So the other games played in the venue where it had turned more with different pitches. So that's why they got it wrong. But in the end, it just meant Australia, I don't think, had enough firepower with the ball. And in the end, we saw Kohli's class with the chase. He was just able to move the ball around. I also thought as well, and I read out the scores at the top, a lot of starts for Australia, but no one really went on and made the big score. Head got out for 39, Marnus for 29. Even Smith, despite him playing superbly for 73, that was just when he was starting to get going. And he missed a full toss off Shami. He was coming down the wicket, advancing down the wicket, and I just don't think he picked it up out of Shami's hand and ended up missing a full toss. And that he got out, and then Glenn Maxwell got out. And Damien, as a Victorian, you're going to have to try and mount a defence here because this was the yin and yang of Glenn Maxwell. We've seen how good he is, but that was a shocking shot. I mean, he hits a six and then just played all around the straight one and was bowled.
Sometimes you get carried away with your own adrenaline after you hit a six, and maybe that's what happened to a certain degree. One positive to take out of it, I really was impressed with the way right throughout the tournament Alex Carey carried himself, Menners. I mean, he saved the day along with Inglis against England and was very, very good, 61 off 57 against India as well. Just didn't have enough partners there to help him out over the long period of time. But a player who's got a reputation as a good bloke, Menners, and he's starting to come into his own in terms of lifting for his side and taking that extra level of responsibility with the bat.
He's a ripper bloke, and he played excellently. But that was the thing. So Smith and Maxwell got out, and then Carey has to bat with the tail, and they had to bat a bit slower and try and chew up the overs. And at one stage Australia was looking at around 300, and had they got that, I think it would have been a very competitive chase. I mean, we saw India; they got there with 2 overs to spare, but you add that 30 runs that they left out there, then it could have been a completely different result. Also, Australia's fielding probably wasn't at its best, so Connolly dropped Rowett in the second over. A couple more chances went down, one off Connolly by Maxwell, which was a Kohli chance when he was just in the low 50s, so that was obviously would have made a big difference. So, those little things, you get Rowett out in the second over and you've got new batters facing the new ball. So just, good fight from Australia, from a young Australian team. But in the end, didn't get the team selection right, left a few runs out there. They battled hard with the ball, but I think we saw India's class shine through and they go through to the final. They will host the final in Dubai now. So, it's not really the Champions Trophy in Pakistan anymore. It's the Champions Trophy in Dubai.
Yeah. Do you reckon there'll be, from the wider cricket community, Menners, if India win, what would be the overwhelming feeling, do you think? And do you think India really, I mean, they'll take the victory, no question about that, but the Indian public really going to be in full rapturous celebration or not?
Yes, yeah. I don't think India gives a shit about what the rest of the world thinks. I think, that's my opinion. And they are, they do have, some, again, this just goes down to the governance of the ICC. When they awarded the Champions Trophy to Pakistan, they were taking a big risk and it has blown up in their face. I get the intention to want to take big-time cricket to Pakistan, but I don't think they really thought it through because India was never going to go there. And you're not going to play the tournament without India. So you're always going to be in this situation. So I think, poor leadership from the ICC. I don't think India will care. But I do think this whole tournament has just lost a lot of luster, a lot of shine. I think most of the cricket world is pretty cynical about it because the cards are stacked in India's favour so much that it's hard to get too enthusiastic about it.
But hasn't that always been the case, Menners? Not necessarily the Indian part, but in general in regards to the Champions Trophy. It's never really had that great level of interest. It's sort of seen as I've said before, a cousin to the World Cup.
I think this less more so. I think you can enjoy the other ones where they're seen to be on a level playing field, like the one in 2017 in England that Pakistan won, but this one's just lost all credibility. The ICC is losing more and more credibility as the days go by. And, it's hard to get too excited about it. So, it is what it is. I think sort of thinking about it from an Australian point of view, it's hard to make much of it because, we effectively only played 2 games. We had the 2 no results. We won won the famous game against England. Lost to India. So overall, it's hard to sort of take too much from an Australian point of view. But, we said in the build-up, this is a great tournament for experience to get some high-pressure cricket into some of these younger players. And, I think we saw Matt Short before his injury show something. Josh Inglis with a ton. Ben Dwarshuis, I think, has shown he's got something at international level. Nathan Ellis, I think his reputation has gone from strength to strength.
Yep.
And I think, in fact, he's going to be an integral part of these white ball teams moving forward.
That's a great story too, Menners, because Ellis, in his early 20s, he was struggling to get into the Tasmanian outfit. He was working on the roof of Myer in Hobart, working on the tradie side of things. And here he is and carving out a pretty good niche for himself.
Oh, absolutely. So, great story for him. So Spencer Johnson, Tanvir Sangha, Cooper Connolly, they all got some experience in different conditions in an ICC tournament. So, I think it's a net positive for Australia. And I think they can hold their heads high that, although they got beaten by India, they still pushed them pretty far when they didn't get their team right. The conditions were in India's favour and, they had to do all the extra travelling. So, well done to Australia. And, that's the end of Steve Smith's 50-over career. Now that I know his retirement, I'm even sadder that we couldn't win the title because, it would have been fantastic for him to go out a winner of the Champions Trophy. But alas, not to be. All right, for those listening on the podcast, we'll take our first break and then we'll be back with more. Welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. I am Menners. I'm with Damien Watson. Lots of domestic cricket news to talk about. But firstly, Damien, Mitchell Starc spoke on the Willow Talk podcast, and he said that one of the reasons he didn't play in the Champions Trophy was he has sore ankles after the Test summer, and he's had ankle pain in the past. Pat Cummins said he had sore ankles as well. Josh Hazlewood, we know, has a niggle. And, what I'm interested in is, how much of these are genuine sore ankles or how much of this is, okay, I can't play in the Champions Trophy and play in the IPL and play in the World Test Championship final. So I'm going to miss the Champions Trophy because I want that IPL pain packet. But I better have some kind of line ready. So if I just say sore ankles, it's kind of like hard to sort of argue about that. I know Stark's had ankle problems in the past, but it seems to be like this epidemic of sore ankles among these fast bowlers who needed to miss the Champions Trophy.
Maybe you could win on a technicality of that situation, Menners. Maybe they do have sore ankles, just in their general pain that they often experience with their workload. I'm sort of not sympathetic, but I can understand why they go down this path though, because Menners, it's a pretty with their type of workload as well, and on top of a pretty demanding schedule. Sometimes you have to prioritise. If I was in that same situation, I know people might disagree with me on this, but if I was in that same situation and I know I've got a secure role in the IPL and in the Australian team, I'm probably going to be prioritising certain fixtures as well. And it's interesting when he said personal views. I wonder what that's in reference to.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Be interesting
the India situation, perhaps.
Yeah, I'm not sure. He actually didn't go into it, so Stark doesn't often like to be clickbait. So he kept those personal views to himself. maybe it was around Afghanistan, who knows? But the thing about it is, it's fine in the big picture for Australia, because I think, this tournament was a good chance for the next crop of fast bowlers to have a go, because Stark, Hazelwood, maybe Cummins aren't going to be at the 2027 50 over World Cup. But I just think it's in that curious, sort of interesting juggling act where someone like a Stark or a Cummins, they're going to miss playing for their country, but they're going to play in the IPL, so they kind of need to spin it in a way that's easier to digest. All right, let's get to the domestic news. Wonderful scenes in Adelaide on the weekend. South Australia won the Dean Jones Trophy. They beat Victoria by 64 runs. They end a 13-year domestic stretch of no South Australian titles. South Australia batted first, made 7 for 268. The best of the Victorian bowlers, and you might think I'm making a mistake here, but it was Peter Siddle with 3 for 40. And I actually heard the coach of South Australia, Ryan Harris, talking about the game. And he was asked if he played a lot of cricket with Siddle. And he said, yeah, I played most of my test career with Siddle. So, Siddle's still going. And Ryan Harris has been retired for 10 years. Quite unbelievable. And so South Australia, 7 for 268. Victoria, all out for 204. Henry Thornton, best of the bowlers, 4 for 27. Nathan McAndrew, he is everywhere, 3 for 47. And, a famous win for South Australia, winning the Dean Jones Trophy. Henry Thornton was named the inaugural Michael Bevan medalist, which is the player of the match in that final. And, really, Damien, this is just quite an historic moment for South Australian cricket. They've been down in the doldrums for so long. They've got such a passionate fan base, the Saka, they love their cricket, and, finally they get a title.
They had a decent crowd as well, by the looks of things, Menners, at least by today's standards when it comes to the one-day format at domestic level. And it'll be interesting to see. It looks like they're going to host the Shield final. There's still a few chinks to iron out as to whether anyone else gets a bonus point, and depends on the results for the last 2 home and away games for a lot of the sides. But it's looking like they're going to host the Shield final. So it'll be interesting to see whether they pull a pretty decent crowd. It's been a long time between drinks, as we know. The 95-96 summer was the last time they prevailed in a Shield final. So there's a bit of a buzz around South Australian cricket at the moment. And it's at a good time of year as well in Adelaide, when they've got the, Fringe Festival and Wome Adelaide and Gabba rounds on the horizon as well. So it's a lovely time of year. So hopefully they turn out in that situation. But they did in the One Day Cup final. And the other thing too is, Menders, if you look at their squad holistically, they're at a stage now when a fair chunk of the players are now in that sweet spot between, say, 24, 25 years of age on the bottom end and around 32, 33 years of age at the top end. So you're in your prime physical shape, prime mental shape as well, because you don't get as jaded when it comes to cricket at that sort of level. So I think they're in that sweet spot now, that South Australian squad. And Ryan Harris, you mentioned his name, really has instilled a lot of self-belief. I think that's been the key difference since coming into the coaching tenure here at South Australia. He came in August and was appointed. Not saying Gillespie and his predecessors did a bad job in that respect, but Ryan Harris just has that charismatic ability to allow his players to run through a brick wall and make them run through a brick wall and believe they can win. And that's something, that's a lot of the dialogue you hear coming out of South Australia at the moment as well. So a well-deserved victory. And yeah, they're going great guns, and they have a lot of depth as well, Menners. If you have a look at, the fact that across various formats, they have an embarrassment of riches in a way. I mean, Henry Hunt and Connor McInerney are the regular Shield openers, I suppose. And then you got Mackenzie Harvey in the one-day format, who was very good, scored a century in the game leading up to the One Day Cup final. He's a player that's not necessarily in the Shield side to a great degree. So they've got that duality of both formats pretty well covered depth-wise compared to maybe a lot of other states.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ryan Harris, first year as coach, took over from Jason Gillespie, and Harris, in being accepting praise for the success of the win, has been very vocal in wanting to praise Jason Gillespie for building the squad. Jason Gillespie did a great job recruiting and bringing players from interstate, and this has been building for a few years. But Ryan Harris was asked what he tried to do differently. This was on SEN today, Damien's employer, and They he said, look, he's big on, he acknowledged that just being a new voice often works, and you see this in footy, any sport. Sometimes just being a new voice can get something different out of the players. But he also said that, Harris is big on training hard. He's big on having honest conversations and asking, questions of the players. For example, what are they trying to achieve at training? He wants them to have real purpose at training. He wants training to be really competitive. And he said to players, look, if you're not here to get better, if you're not here to be competitive at training, I want you to go home. And Jake Lehman was asked what Harris has done for the team. And he says he's actually put a bit more pressure on them to win. He's actually talked to them a lot about, look, we're here to win. It's time to actually not just perform well, but get the results. And so, that's all come together at the end of this few years of building up. And I think, we're seeing a really, an exciting period for South Australian cricket. And we're seeing maybe the emergence of a new coach in the Australian landscape. I mean, is the trajectory for Ryan Harris now into that Australian team as a coach eventually?
It's an interesting one because a lot of those assets you mentioned there, Menas, they're sort of from the old school, aren't they? Having honest conversations, emphasising the importance of winning. And I do wonder, he seems to balance the fine line between, in the current generation, going too far or not going hard enough pretty well. But when you have those old school philosophies, it sort of depends on the group that you have, because sometimes you can venture too far according to the players when you have that win at all costs type of mentality, don't you? So it'd be interesting whether he does advance in that respect, given what happened with Justin Langer.
Well, it's interesting because you're right. It's more old school, especially the attitude around training. And I wonder if that is actually transferable to international cricket. Because what I've seen, if I'm being honest, I don't think this Australian team as a group trains that hard, and they will tell you they play so much and they're so good that they need to say, like the bowlers need to save their overs for the games. Of course, Marnus and Smith and some of the batters, face a lot of balls in the nets. I'm not saying some of them, I know they work hard, but this sort of collective mentality of these really hard training sessions was something that, you're right, Langer had, but has sort of gone out of the current Australian team. And I just wonder if it's transferable, because at domestic cricket, it works more. There's less cricket to be played. You've got, you are striving to maybe play at the top level. So, you can push them a bit harder, but it's a great reward for them. And it's a great point you make about being an old school method. And, with the Australian team changing, and I've mentioned this before, McDonald may have been the best coach for an older, mature team, but maybe we're actually going to need someone like a Harris who's going to be a bit harder on the team as the young players. Well,
what if the players resist against it?
Yep. Well, then we'll be a situation where Cummins fires Langer again. All right. So congratulations to South Australia. Sheffield Shield starts again this weekend, and South Australia looking for the double now. So it was a stellar weekend for domestic cricket, because you had the one-day domestic final on Saturday. Then you had the WNCL final on Sunday. Queensland hosting. Not poor Queensland. Fantastic for New South Wales. You would have heard Maitland Brown on the show previewing the final. And the Breakers won. They won their 21st WNCL title. New South Wales batted first, were all out for 215. Annika Leroyd made 80 off 110 balls. Love seeing her do well. I've mentioned it many times, but watching her for a long time, and she's maturing into such a wonderful cricketer. And then Queensland were cruising to victory. They were 2 for 135. Sienna Ginger and Georgia Redmayne were in total control. They'd put on 105. They needed just 81 more runs, but then Queensland lost 8 for 59 to be bowled out, and New South Wales won the title. Amazing stuff. Unlucky for Queensland, a couple of things didn't go their way. Firstly, Sienna Ginger, who was batting with Georgia Redmayne, keep an eye on her. I watched her in the Spring Challenge before the summer. She is going to be a genuine superstar. She's got a beautiful technique with the bat, can bowl. So I was not surprised to see her doing well in the big game, but just Ginger for Australia will happen, trust me. But then Redmayne Georgia
Oh,
Redmayne was so unlucky. She was at, I know Damien's a big fan of Georgia's.
yeah.
She was at the non-strikers end. She was battling away. She was on 97 not out, playing a skipper's knock, and she was run out at the non-strikers end when Lauren Cheadle attempted to take a caught and bowled that deflected onto the stumps. So she was out. That kind of ended the Queensland bid for the title and ended up losing the game. And New South Wales win in famous fashion. Lauren Cheadle, 2 wickets. Sammy Joe Johnson, 2 wickets. Sam Bates, 2 wickets. Georgia Adams, 2 wickets. It was a real team effort. That run out. And then our friend of the show, Maitland Brown, 1 wicket with an absolute dirty full toss that the batter just hit straight up in the air. But sometimes shit gets wickets for sure. And yeah, just a tremendous story. You know, this New South Wales team has been struggling for years. They're a young team, and for them to win in Queensland's backyard, so happy for them. And their 21st title. What a record.
That's right, and that's off the back of 5 years of rebuilding, really, Menners. I think they were in the final in 2020 against WA, and then since then there's been a real regeneration. They've lost a lot of players to the Australian team, obviously, and there's instability that comes off of that. And some players have also, because they can't break into the New South Wales side, have gone elsewhere and taken advantage of opportunities elsewhere in other states. But credit to New South Wales. I agree with you in regards to Leroy. She's a player that's certainly got even further scope for improvement too. That's the scary thing. And I really like the look of Claire Moore as well, a player who's still quite young. I reckon she could develop into a very disciplined batter. No question about that. But yeah, Queensland, another opportunity. You do feel for, or I feel for them in a way, because you look at the nucleus of that side. Some of them are in the Brisbane Heat lineup as well, Menners, and they've lost a couple of WBBL finals. And even in the WNCL, Menners, they lost to Tasmania recently in a WNCL final, and they lose another one here to New South Wales when really they were in cruise control. Georgia Redmayne did not look like getting out. I think that was the only way she was going to get dismissed for something freakish like that to occur. One of the more unlucky players, I think, in general, to miss out on Australian selection over time as well. So, yeah, although she probably had her finest moment in a WNCL final about 4 years ago when she made a century against Victoria. But, yeah, you do feel for Queensland, but New South Wales thoroughly deserved the victory. And it's been great planning over the last few years to regenerate that side.
Yeah, you're right. So Queensland Fire have lost the last 2 WNCL finals now. Brisbane Heat have lost 2 WBBL finals. They also lost the Spring Challenge finals. So some of these players might have played in 5 losing finals in the last 2 years. And, you know, there was a spate a couple of years ago in all sport where I think Queensland sides were in grand finals and lost them all. So they can get to finals, but they're struggling to win them. Just on Annika Leroy, she was the player of the match, and her season finished 577 runs at an average of 48.08. So a breakout season for her. Congratulations to the Breakers. I mentioned the interview with Maitland Brown I did prior to that game. She's a great chat, and you know it was really good to get her thoughts on all things cricket. And you know, Damien, a couple of things struck me, but the main thing was her thoughts around the WBBL. She seemed quite disappointed that the WBBL is not being played in school holidays, which is affecting the crowds. And she also seemed to be quite a fan of double headers where you play a WBBL and a BBL game on the same day. What did you make of those comments?
Yeah, very interesting, and probably one of the first players to come out and say it as well. I think a couple have flagged that, but not necessarily said it. There's positives and negatives to both, isn't there? I don't think you can get an absolutely perfect scenario, because obviously back in the day when the WBBL first started, there were double headers with the men, but there was a longer gap between the matches. I think it's sort of come into the consciousness again because of the success of the 100 and how big that's been for women's cricket, where they play double headers with the men and it's pretty much 2 games in one, basically, where the women play and then the men are straight after, or vice versa. And families, particularly in these cost of living times, Menners, when we're all struggling to make a quid and hold on to a quid, you want value for money. So maybe that could be potentially earmarked down the track. The problem is it's hard to do that when you're clashing with the test matches. And this is the advantage England have compared to Australia. You know, the Big Bash is on at night after the test matches. It's hard to pull those double headers together. I think TV-wise, it still does reasonably well. I haven't looked at the figures, but it does reasonably well where it is. Yeah,
Well, that's why I think one of the reasons it's not the double headers because the WBBL serves as great prime time content for Channel 7 and Fox.
in a
Just
good window.
in a good window, and it does really well ratings wise. But you're right. I mean, that is the logjam of this Australian calendar. You've got Test matches in December, which means you can't play the double headers, and then if you move into January. You can't play the WBBL in January because the Women's Premier League in India is moving to
Correct.
January and February from next year. So, Australia are in this quandary of they don't really have a window to play the WBBL. And also, as opposed to the 100, I think there is they want to make the WBBL a standalone product that is successful in its own right. So if you try to fit in the WBBL sort of in December during the day to run into BBL games, then the sort of WBBL is sort of flying under the radar because you've got tests on, you've got the BBL on, and it's just an unsolvable problem. There's no ideal solution at the moment.
Maybe do they work on trying to market the product a little bit better, Menners, to get people to the games? Because the attendances, particularly those midweek games, unfortunately, there's not many people that turn up. Let's be honest. When you look at the WPL in India and you look at the 100 in England, they get far bigger attendances than we do here, even though you could argue probably just as good, if not better, standard of cricket sometimes here in Australia for the women's game. And yeah, even with the Aussie women's cricket team, Menners, I argue, given their success, they deserve better crowds. It comes down maybe to marketing to a degree.
Yeah, it's such a quandary. And, Maitland was saying that the good thing is if you play on the same day, kind of unify the men's and females teams, you promote the women's game, there can be bigger crowds there. But I just don't see a way of it happening the way the current climate is structured. The only thing I could, if I'm thinking outside the box, Damien, maybe you could fabricate some double headers. So maybe Australia comes up with a sort of a men's T20 competition that's, in September, October that runs alongside the WBBL. So you can play double headers in major stadiums. But again, how are you going to do that? So, I just don't know if there's a solution for the moment, but it was interesting to hear the frustration from Maitland. And it just shows, the scheduling calendar for Australia is just so difficult. We mentioned those challenges. WPL in January. You've got Australia's Test summer now, where they like to play that December and finish by the Sydney Test match. So in December it's Test cricket and then BBL at the end. There's no room for the WBBL there. So yeah, it's a bit of a quandary at the moment for the WBBL, how they increase crowds and get that kind of engagement. But
because with the final, Menners, I thought it was a bit of a disappointment. I think the Ashes, women's Ashes Test crowd wasn't too bad considering how poor England were and things like that. But I was a bit disappointed with the WBBL final crowd. It was only 5,800 there for the Renegades and Heat game. Albeit they put it on in the middle of the day when it was a little bit wet as well and humid. But at the same time, you look at previous years, they got far better crowds in Adelaide and Perth. So, yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah. Well, let's see how they go. But interesting to hear Maitland's thoughts on that. All right, we'll take our final break for those listening on the podcast. Then we'll be back. Quick WPL update. We've got Can't Let It Go. And one talking point, Ben Horn wrote an interesting article in the Daily Telegraph. Welcome back to the Cricket Unfiltered podcast. Steve Smith's one-day career is over, but the podcast is still going despite being depressed about that news. Just a quick Women's Premier League update. Delhi Capitals are into the playoffs. They beat RCB a couple of nights ago. Jess Jonathan, a big contributor in a win over Elise Perry's RCB. She made 61 not out off 38 deliveries. And then overnight, Beth Mooney continued her stunning form, 96 not out for the Gujarat Giants in a win over the UP Warriors. So Delhi Capitals are on top of the table and into the playoffs. Then you got Gujarat and the Mumbai Indians both on 6 points, and then RCB and UP Warriors on 4 points. So it's going to go down to the wire. Finals are next week. So, this next week of cricket is going to be really exciting. So tune into the WPL.
Good crowds too, there, Minners.
Huge crowds, and interestingly, like on Quick Info, they have the WPL above the Champions Trophy when you're searching for it. Again, just the Indian influence maybe pushing down the Champions Trophy. Now, interesting article in the News Corp papers today by a friend of the show, Ben Horn. He said that he's written that Cricket Australia is seriously considering introducing privatization to the Big Bash League. So it is understood CA will engage external consultants over the next 6 months to look into this initiative of maybe bringing in private equity to the Big Bash. And this follows the recent sale of England's 800 franchises for nearly 2 billion Australian dollars. So I actually think this is a really good thing that they're looking into it. I mean, you look at those numbers, what would $2 billion do to Australian cricket? And, in my opinion, some of these franchises have much stronger brands than the 100 teams, the Sixers, the Stars, the Thunder. I mean, these teams are, been around for 15 years now and have strong brands. So, I think they should definitely look into it. And if they can do something to bring in that sort of money to Australian cricket, then they would be negligent not to.
Completely agree. The only risk, and we've seen it in other sports, is when the river runs dry with some of these benefactors, for instance, or things just go awry in that sense. There's always a risk, though, isn't there? But I think if you want to genuinely compete against the IPL and some of the other domestic competitions around the world, Menners, when it comes to getting some of the better players around the world, it's probably the only way you're going to reach those heights, because the cricketing bodies themselves, the state cricketing bodies, they're not going to compete with that, realistically.
Absolutely, yeah. For the competition to compete with the other global T20, it's the only way. At the moment we're seeing the SAT20, we're seeing this the IL T20 going on at the same time as the Big Bash, and you look at that money. Like, I think if the England hundreds franchises can generate 2 billion Australian dollars in our currency, then I think Australia could generate more for our franchise. I mean, how much would a stake in the Sixers be worth? I mean, that is a storied club. I mean, what the fuck have the Manchester Originals ever done, or any of these idiot 100 franchises? Like, the London Spirit. I mean, these have been around for a few years. These are, Johnny come latelys. But I think the Australian franchises, so ingrained in the Australian culture. Even, the little Hobart Hurricanes. I mean, you could be like one of these $1 billion people that buys a little football club in England and takes them to the top. So
yeah, it's a good ego project for billionaires, Menners.
Yep.
There's a few around in Australia.
Absolutely. And I think there's
you being one of them.
Speculation that the Indian, a lot of the money would come out of India. But, I just think this is really exciting time for Australian cricket. And we'll see how this story develops, but I think it's going to move pretty quickly over the next couple of years, because what is moving quickly is the T20 market, and the Big Bash is doing well, but it's still hard for them to keep up. And as well as it's doing, come finals time every year, all the players are gone to play in tournaments where they get paid more.
Correct. I agree.
All right. Well, that is all the cricket news. Let's wrap this up with Can't Let It Go. That little bit of cricket news you just can't let go through to the wicketkeeper. Damien, what have you got for us?
Well, this week marked the third anniversary of the passing of both Shane Warne and Rod Marsh, Menners. And I was reflecting on this with people the other day and thinking it was sort of, particularly with Shane Warne's passing, it was a bit of a where were you moment, wasn't it? There's not many Australian figures that, I guess, elicit that type of reaction, but it really was. And I just thought back to when I found out. I think I was just scrolling around online and a message came up on one of the group chats that I was in saying Shane Warne passed away. And it was one of those, sometimes when you see that, you're like, oh, wow. But like, I genuinely didn't believe it in that situation. It just seemed so hard to comprehend. So, yeah, I still remember the news. And I think it did genuinely shock people because he was so larger than life and still so young.
Oh, absolutely. Where
were you?
One of the most shocking bits of news I've ever received. I don't think I was anywhere exciting. I think I was in bed because if I remember rightly, Australia was playing Pakistan in a test match at that time. So,
yeah,
it was a long day. So in the morning, news came to pass that Rod Marsh had passed away. And then, so there's, Australia plays Pakistan. And I think the news broke towards the end of play for that test match. So it was late. I was watching the cricket, and Gus Wallen, friend of the show, tweeted out something that, Warney, I'm not Shane Warne. And, the news, it still doesn't sink in. I mean, it's hard to believe. It's still hard to believe, 3 years later. But yeah, and that, couldn't sleep. It was one of the more shocking bits of news I can remember. Where were you when Michael Hutchins died? Where were you when Shane Warne died? These are, historic moments in Australian history. And, I think about Shane Warne, lucky enough to be there at his test debut, lucky enough to see him play lots of test cricket live, lucky enough to meet him a couple of times. And, he was every bit that nickname that he was given early on of Hollywood. He was, one of the biggest stars in Australian life, and, not just cricket, but, he was a genuine superstar and
massive in the UK, massive in the UK, like unbelievable. How famous he was even over there.
So that's good reflections on 3 years since Shane Warne passed away. Well, Mike can't let it go. One of Shane Warne's teammates and good mates, Steve Waugh, was speaking to Ian Healy on SEN about Sam Constas, and Steve Waugh made some comments about Sam Constas. He said, "You've got to have more respect for the game. The game will bite you pretty quickly if you don't respect it. I'd like to see him play a traditional innings in the next couple of matches and get his head right and get him back in the zone. I've seen him play grade cricket for Sutherland, and he's technically very correct and plays traditionally. He's got to get back to that, because if he keeps playing the way he is, he's not going to be successful." So look, I thought very wise words from Steve Waugh to Constas. I think Constas needs to be given credit, because I think he's a bit smarter than we give him credit for, because I actually think some of his aggression has been quite calculated. When Bumrah was on top, it was like, I'm not going to hang around here. And I think he felt the same with Boland. But I do agree with Waugh. You can't always go that way, because it's not always going to come off. And sometimes actually it's just about get through the next hour, because, for example, Scott Boland can't bowl all day for Victoria. So if you get through that first spell, who knows what's going to happen. So, I thought that was really wise words from Steve Waugh. And I think Sam Constas would be wise to listen, because Steve Waugh doesn't say much. But I think he also made comments that as a 19-year-old, it's a real emotional roller coaster for him, and he's got to be careful of that. So, I think Steve Waugh, who was a bit of a child prodigy himself, is a good one to advise Constas to maybe just settle things down a bit and just try and hit a smoother approach for a little while. And that'll just help with everything, his mental game as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, because it's always going to be a hit and miss, his style at the moment, isn't it? So you've got to learn to, the best players in the world, they can score quickly, but they're measured in the way they do it. And sometimes the game situation isn't conducive to that sort of style. So the players that can adapt are the best, I think, in my view. So, yeah, pretty reasonable words from Steve Waugh. I know you said Steve Waugh, great mate of Shane Warne. I don't know if they're entirely great mates by the end, but yeah.
That was really a bit of sarcasm.
All right.
All right, that is it for this episode of Cricket Unfiltered. I've been your host, Menners. Don't forget, rate and review the show on your favorite app. I'll read out any new reviews.
Comment.
Please comment. Yes, send. I've had some great emails recently. People love the new theme song. I do get people emailing asking what that song is, and that's The Foundling, song. And I also got an email from a fan from Yorkshire, Melvin, who was, he said he choked on his cornflakes this morning in the UK when Ravi Shastri interviewed Rohit Sharma and asked him if the Indian team were okay with the quick turnaround in games. I'm a Yorkshire member and a POM, so I don't say this lightly, but come on, Aussie. This was obviously before we lost, but great to hear from Mel. Great to hear from the listeners. Damien, where can people catch up with you?
At Damo_Watts on Twitter. I don't have Instagram though, Menners.
Not a Graham guy. Fair enough. You do have a face for Twitter. I did get a bit of feedback for putting out that I thought Steve Smith should have gone ahead and made Nora gone through with the appeal against Afghanistan. You know, some people are with me, some people are against me, but anyway. Let me know your thoughts on that one. We'll be back next week with another episode. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye, Damien. Bye-bye, listeners.